So it's time to make our apple pie, and the way that I make an apple pie is with Granny Smith apples, and I use the recipe out of the Joy of Cooking book. The most important thing about making an apple pie from scratch is getting the right thickness of the apple slices. And so what I do is I peel the apples. You don't want to peel into the disposal. You never want to peel potatoes or apples into the disposal. You always want to peel them into the garbage. And you can either use a peeler like this, or you can use a paring knife. It really doesn't matter. I find that I get a better peel with my peeler. It takes less apple out of it than the paring knife does. So once your apple is peeled, then you cut it up into slices. You can make 4 slices, but as long as you take the seeds out. And then you take a slice of the apple, and you can use either a paring knife if you want to, or you can use a regular trimmer, and you slice it really as thin as you can. This is kind of what you want to see in terms of the thickness. You want to keep them all about the same thickness. You don't want to make anything too thick or too thin. This is pretty ideal. And so you just want to cut those into your container until you've got, in this case, 6 cups or so of apples. I've got a deep dish pie crust here, and because I love deep dish apple pie, and so instead of 6 cups of apples, I've made 8 cups of sliced apples. And using a slightly modified version of the Joy of Cooking recipe, I am not sponsored by Joy of Cooking for what it's worth. I'm going to put 1/3 of a cup of white sugar in there. You notice I'm using coconut sugar because I tend to shy away from regular processed sugar, but it still tastes really yummy. And 1/3 of a cup of brown sugar. And then it calls for a couple of tablespoons of cornstarch. Arrowroot powder works just as well. And cornstarch can often have gluten in it. It calls for 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. Now, because this recipe calls for 6 cups of apples and I'm using 8 cups of apples, I'm just going to use heaping measures. So instead of an 1/8 of a teaspoon, I'll have a heaping teaspoon, 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. It calls for 1/8 of a teaspoon of nutmeg. Again, a little bit of a heap. And then it calls for a teaspoon of cinnamon. I like cinnamon. It says to mix that all together, and to sift that over the apples. And essentially what that means is just coat the apples with it. So I'm just going to pour this over the apples, and then, as well as we can, because there are a lot of apples now, you just stir the apples until they're pretty much all coated. And so when they're all coated, they will all kind of look like this. You want your apples to be heaping over your crust like this, because they will cook down. So this might overflow a little tiny bit, but they will cook down. And then what you do is you take some butter, and I've just got some butter here. If you're dairy free, you can use coconut oil that's butter flavored. And I often do, but today I'm just using regular old butter. And it calls for 1 tablespoon to 1.5 tablespoons of butter dotted around the pie. And so I'm just going to take little bits and put it around the pie. All right, so when you are making your topping for the apple pie, you can use a regular lattice topping, but I like a streusel topping, and so does my family. So you use equal amounts of flour and butter and sugar. And I'm just eyeballing this today. And I'm going to put a little bit of oat in there as well, because I like a little bit of it's almost like an apple crisp type topping for me. And you can use a fork You can use brown sugar, it doesn't really matter. And you cut in the butter just like you would with a pastry blender, but my pastry blender is dirty from having made the pie crusts. So I'm just going to use a fork. You cut in the butter. All right, so I've cut in the butter and I'm going to add some oats, and I'm going to add a little bit of cinnamon. That makes it taste really, really yummy. As you can tell, I don't usually measure things like this. I just put enough to make me happy in there. And the original recipe doesn't call for any oats at all, but like I said, I like an apple crisp style topping. So I just put in a little bit of oats. And then you want it to where it forms like a ball almost of the topping. And so this is pretty decent, and I'll show you what I mean by forms a ball. When you put it together, it stakes together like that. And so then you kind of take bits of it like that, and you put it over the pie so that it's completely covered. But again, you want this to be completely covered. And you press down, and then you bake this at 450 for 10 minutes. Reduce the heat to 350 for about another 40 minutes, and then it's all done.